Hey, Krista.
Hi,
How are you?
Faith and Art.
Here we are. We're here to talk about it, here to talk about this series of going to school in the summer,
Summer
which
school.
I like this way of doing it because one, it's free.
Mhm.
Two, it's on our terms. We push play when we want to learn something. And three, we had the most incredible guests ever. Hello, professors. The lineup was really wonderful. Um, do you have any initial thoughts about the series and what you got out of it?
I think it was an interesting series for me. And the reason is because I feel like at one point in my life, I was more engaged with these different aspects of art, like theater. And, I was an English lit major in college. So at
Mm-hmm.
one point, I was really engaged in literature. And that has slowly over time just lessened more and more and more until
Mm-hmm.
I almost feel like at certain places or stages in my life, it's been kind of non-existent. Like I just haven't made
Mm-hmm.
time to go to the theater. I really, even now, am not reading a lot of fiction
Mm-hmm.
because I have too many things that I want to learn about that are nonfiction. And so I'm like reading nonfiction all the. I mean, I'm a reader and I'm a
Mm-hmm.
learner, so I value that, but I don't always value reading fiction and
Mm-hmm.
making that a part of my life, even though at one time that was a staple for me. And so it was challenging. I felt like this series actually really challenged me and gave me some food for thought. And even just, talking about art and how I can incorporate that more into my life. So, did you
Mm-hmm.
feel the same way or did you feel differently?
I did, and especially around certain topics more than others. So I would say the visual arts, I actually have a good portion of that in my life. And we can talk about that a little bit more later. But reading fiction for sure, for sure. I had somebody ask me at the beginning of the summer if they could borrow a fiction book. Like they specifically said a fiction book because they know that I'm going to recommend all of these nonfiction, faith based kind of books to them. And I had a very, very small selection to choose from. And it is along the same lines that I feel like I have limited time. And so I want information, maybe a little bit because of what we do. I want to know what people are writing about and thinking about, talking about. And that struck me when talking to Karen that we take in information and we can justify it and say, I need to know this. And it has a value. And it gets a little bit to the Protestant work ethic like, this is productive. And this is going to help me be more productive. Even if it's a book about my spiritual life, it's going to help me be more productive in that area. And fiction is acknowledging that we need some beauty in our life. And in the end, it will make us more productive. That's the secret behind it. But we have to value that. Um, and theater, yes, I would say the same thing. I mean, hello, let's just reiterate we met on the set of a chorus line because we were both in it. So there was a point in both of our lives where being part of a theater production was a thing. And it has not been a thing in my life. And so for sure, I feel like there are certain arts, especially that used to be have more prominence. And for me, dance was part of it. That's why I was in chorus line because I'm not a singer. I'm not really much of an actor, but I loved to dance and I still do. But I'm not part of a dance troupe. And again, that stage of
You're not?
life,
You're
right?
not?
No,
You don't
though
do
I,
what those moms ones? You know how sometimes they have the grandma ones or the mom ones?
yeah,
Have you
no,
seen those?
my mom is part of a grandma one.
Okay.
And yeah, she's part of a senior hula group. So it's in my blood. It's part of what we do. When TikTok came out, I was like, oh, there's a place for me here in this. But then my
Yeah.
children were like, yeah, no, mom, please don't. I'm like, no, there really is. There's dancing and momming combined, but that has not come to fruition.
Okay, well,
Uh,
this may be your inspiration. This may be your avenue right here into the TikTok dance mom world.
right. Although I think our guests would say dance for the love of dancing, right?
Yes.
You know the
Oh,
movie
I know.
Sing? Did you ever see
Yes.
that? Your
Oh,
kids
I
are kind
sing
of
is so no, I love sing. I love it.
so right that there are very few movies I will watch over and over, and Sing is one of them. And the message of sing for the love of singing. You don't and you don't have to win the award. You just need to love to sing, and that in itself is worth it. So I do that. Those themes did bubble up here for me. Anything else that came up for you as we were talking to our guests?
I would say this idea of story, the repetitive idea of story came up several times, and just the value of sharing story. And I think as I'm reflecting on it and reflecting on this series, I think one of the things that story does is it humanizes people and it brings people closer together. And there is just something very central in that, I think, in our polarized, divided world, that we need more of that. We need more of kind of this sharing of story and this experience that we go on together that humanizes people. And so that came through for me as I kind of thought about it in the broader picture of our cultural context right now. And then also, um, just that there's value in sitting with story. So putting yourself in places where that can happen. So I loved what Mitch Thomas said about the interaction between the audience and the
Mhm,
actors and the play. Like there's kind of like this just synergy happening.
mhm.
And I went to our town's version of Moth not too long ago, which
I
is
don't
called
know what that
Pivot.
is. Okay.
Moth.
Yeah.
You've never heard of Moth?
No.
Okay, well, it's just gone wildfire, just gangbusters. And I can't remember where it started, but it started in a big metropolitan city like New York or Atlanta or something. I don't know, somewhere. I need to find out where it started. But basically, it's storytelling, and they have a podcast called The Moth, and they actually have like really beautiful. Like I would encourage everyone to go listen to some episodes because it's really engaging, and it's people telling stories and often
Mhm,
around a certain subject. And so like when I went to, it was called Pivot Spokane, and they had a theme, and the theme was something like I've got you. And
mm,
so people could tell a story that has to do with I've got you in any way, right? So there's
mhm,
just all these stories. And one of our friends, Katie Blackburn, who's a beautiful writer, and she told a story of her son, and he has autism, he's on the spectrum, and so it was surrounding some things about that, but actually it was more surrounding how her friend came alongside of her during that time of diagnosis, and how difficult that was as she was kind of going through that process. And it was about kind of this friend who, in fact, her name's Emily Love, and she's a coach. And she came alongside of her in a really beautiful way. And it was powerful. Like I was so inspired. I walked away feeling so inspired to be a better friend, but I also walked away with a new connection, not new for me, with Katie, but the audience walked away with a new connection with her. For me, it was just kind of a renewed connection of that part of her story. And so, just this whole idea that story is powerful, whether it comes through literature or art or theater or we know song. I
mhm.
mean, whatever avenue, story has purpose. And it's a really, really important and valuable tool that we need to access, and that we can access with one another in a deeper way.
Yeah. It builds empathy, it builds understanding, all of the things that we want right now. Well, always. And it is interesting to think about our polarized world that we seem to live in right now and the lack of story. Like, is there a connection in part? that we have gotten away from that storytelling element. Though I would say, we still have movies and stuff, but it's almost like those things are meant to be entertaining and not so much about empathy building. And that's why I love stories. And I mean, that's why I like the topic of history, even because it's a big story about humanity and people's lives. And so, anyway, I agree. And I wonder if there is some connection with our lack of story right now that is contributing to our seeming lack of ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and see something from another perspective. I
I think
will,
that's a great point. I think
yeah.
it's a really good point, and I think it's a challenge. Because I think the other thing that happens with story is we learn courage, we learn resilience, we learn what it looks like when Katie Blackburn finds out her son is on the spectrum, and she leans into that with the support of a friend. And she, now she's writing about it, and just, I mean, we learn about what does courage look like in this situation, and then how can I apply that to my situation? It's different from hers, but I need the same kind of resilience and courage,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's something really beautiful that happens in us even when we're inspired by someone else's.
Yeah. And that gets to what Karen said that really stuck with me, that we learn through other characters' epiphanies about virtues that are important. And we learn about them and absorb them and consider them in a different way than if we're reading a nonfiction book about them. And so, again, getting to that efficiency, effectiveness, productivity arm that many of us live in, we can learn some of those skills and like courage in a different way when we're reading good literature and or watching a really great film or standing in front of a piece of artwork that conveys something. So I definitely got that from Karen. And I will say too, I think it struck me, and you mentioned this a second ago, the shared experience that happens when you're in a live audience with live performers. So whether it's a concert or a play, that there is something about the audience interacting collectively with the performance, the dance performance, whatever it might be, that creates a shared experience among people. So then you leave the theater, and even though everybody's processing it in their own way, we've just shared something. And I think that is valuable. And we see that with sports. For example, like if you go to a sporting event and everybody's cheering for the same team, it's a very active, shared participation. But this is a little quieter, a little more subtle, but it could also be a really fun thing. Like you could really be laughing together, crying together. And so I am reappreciating how that can bring people together in a new way. And the truth is, communities, when you go to a community arts event, so I live in a major US city, you live in a smaller city. So we have events available to us, but I think any size community really has arts events available to them, that it brings you together with people that you might not have overlap with. So I naturally have overlap with a lot of other parents whose kids are the same ages as me, people who go to church with me, or even go to other churches around town. We have the overlap, concentric circle kind of things. But something like a music concert may bring me to a place where I'm sitting next to someone that I wouldn't otherwise sit next to. And that's pretty cool. So I'm really appreciating that about live performance art.
Totally. I mean, and I, the last experience that I had where it just took my breath away was when I took my boys to Hamilton in San Francisco. It was a
Mm.
really special thing for like these landmark birthdays, and I surprised them. And we, went to Hamilton, and it literally was breathtaking. Like when you are in the audience and the level of talent, the costumes, the way that they danced, and their choreography and the way they moved on the stage. I mean, it was so exciting. I don't know how else to describe it. Like it just took your breath away. And the audience was having that experience together. My boys and I were having that experience together. And Hamilton is on, I can't remember if it's on Netflix or Prime or whatever, but it's on that, and you can appreciate it. But I will guarantee it is not the same as when you are sitting in that audience. It is not the same breathtaking experience. There is something about that live piece, like you just said, that shared experience that you're having that changes, and it really does change everything.
Yeah. And I found that you can get tickets to things pretty affordably. I mean, we couldn't get tickets to Hamilton here because they sold out in like a second when it came to Denver. But you don't have to go to Hamilton to have that shared experience. So again, no matter the size of your community, and I will say, no matter the size of your budget, you can go to your high school's play and have that experience with people. So I would say challenge yourself and decide. And here's the other thing. We all know that we're busy. So buy the tickets and put it on your calendar, because that's how it's going to happen. I speak from experience from not doing that, and then things don't happen. So buy the tickets, put them on your calendar. Okay, Krista, were you challenged at all through this series?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it before, but I definitely was. I just think we get in our habits and our ruts, and I just really want to incorporate more live theater. That was something really specific I'm walking away from this series. I will say we have an improv theater, and we did do that for someone's birthday before COVID. And it was super fun. It's a live improv theater, and we went to the family friendly version because there's non family friendly versions. But we went to the family friendly one, and it was it was really great. I mean, some of it's cheesy and corny, but I mean, again, it was a shared experience. And I want to do more of that. I want to do more of where we are engaging in these. And it was tiny. I mean, it's a tiny space, it's a tiny audience. But that made it really fun too, and like you were talking about things being affordable. I mean, super affordable for us to take our family to that. And so that's where I just want to challenge myself to do more of things like that, and get, really look into what is offered around me, and, what is coming in future months, and what play is the university putting on. We have two universities. And so, there's bound to be a really great play that we can go see. And then also taking my children and having that become a little bit more a part of their lives, because my kids tend to be pretty sports driven. And so I think helping them to open up a little bit too. So that challenged me there. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that a number of the guests talked about how, as Christians, we often experience art in whatever form and then decide, yes, I approve, or no, I don't. Yes, I like it, or no, I don't. Alyssa said, thumbs up or thumbs down. And I live in my head, and so I can analyze things, and that's part of my nature. And so I felt a little bit challenged to not do that and go into an experience and say, I'm not going to pass my own personal value judgment, whatever that might be, on this experience. I'm just going to experience it and see what it does in me, and be a little more present and not so analytical. And I think that's true. We tend to say, do we approve or do we not approve? And that might have to do with the content. But even it could do with personal taste. Like, I find that to be cheesy or not, or I find that to be tacky or not. And to just say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to experience it and appreciate it for what it offers me.
Yeah. And I also like what she said about, just like you were saying, you just Go to an art museum. Don't feel like you have to get through the museum, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Go stand in front of something that speaks to you, whether that's a sculpture or a piece of art or something, and let it speak to you. And just let that be the experience. And kind of that idea that go deeper instead of broader,
Mm-hmm.
and just allow and start engaging with the story of the art piece in front of you. I thought that was beautiful. I really liked that as well.
Mm-hmm. And not to feel the pressure to read everything that's written next to every piece. Because I do feel that pressure. So I will say, I go to art museums a lot. Part of it is because in Denver, we have a really amazing art museum and kids go free and it's air conditioned. So I take my children often. And, but we also have a number of other museums here in town. And it's something I like to do as an outing with my kids. Um, and so my biggest challenge, I feel like, is to read more fiction because I do have one big reader in my family. And the other day, I don't know if I said this in Karen's interview, but my daughter said to me, Mom, did you used to like to read? Because she knows that I like books. And I've pretty much said, anytime you want to go to the library, I'll take you. Like that's an approved activity. Yeah, I used to like to read. And you used to read. And I said, yes, I used to read. She said, because now I feel like you just read like the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's because she'll see on my computer. So she was saying, I'm not talking about those things. And it was that very distinct fiction, nonfiction. I feel like I should be reading this and instead reading for fun. And I will learn something in it too.
Yeah, and I think like my mom, she's almost always in a book club. And so
Mm-hmm.
that forces her to read. But I mean, she's good at it anyway. But I just think, you can incorporate habits into your life that kind of help you in that process and help you to engage more. And like a book club is a great way to do that because you have a deadline and you're accountable to the story. And so it's going to make you make time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Those things help.
Yes.
And
Okay.
I will also say, I liked Ginny's point about using music to one, engage your soul more, which I do feel like I do that a lot. But I think her point about even taking some of your favorite scriptures or scriptures you want to memorize and putting them to songs you already know, that was a new idea for me. I really hadn't thought about using songs I already know
Mm-hmm.
and putting the scriptural words on that song. So that was I thought, that challenges me. I could try that. I have never tried that before. I've
Mm-hmm.
tried taking other people's songs that they've created about verses and trying to memorize those.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a new approach. Or creating my own. Like she encouraged us to write our own music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that
That's a
feels a little
challenge.
intimidating to me,
Yeah.
but I could take a melody I know
Mm-hmm.
and do that.
Yeah. So that was new. What would you say, Alex, as we're looking at faith and art and maybe some mediums that we didn't cover that you
Mm-hmm.
engage with? What are those for you? I mean, I'm kind of thinking of the obvious here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about reading, but we didn't talk about writing. And um, writing for me over the last several years has become my work. And so I did have probably a year of really uninspired writing block. Like I just didn't want to write anything because I had spent a few years being paid to write, assigned to write about this, being told what to write about for work. And I realized I have lost the love of the process because it's become a job, it's become a chore. And so I had to let myself do some creative things to kind of get out of that and to say, I'm not going to write for an assignment. I'm just going to write no one's ever going to see this. That's a big thing. No one's ever going to read this. No one's ever going to see this. This is just for me and for the process. And that was an epiphany I had a few years ago that if I just put things out, produce, then the creative element isn't there anymore. And one example of doing some writing that then I thought, wow, I really like this, is on our Instagram account on the Open Door Sisterhood. For a while, I was writing prayers on Sundays based on the topic of whatever was on the podcast that week. So, and I've gotten away from that a little bit, but I loved it so much. And other people seemed to like it. So kind of resonated with it.
For sure.
But it felt a little bit like free flow spiritually for me, that I could do that. And because other people seem to resonate with the prayers, I did that in my upcoming book. So I wrote a prayer at the end of every chapter that people could pray in, with the topic of the chapter. So I think that giving yourself some creative space can then help you when you do need to produce, if producing is part of your work in the creative areas, then it can kind of help do that. I did mention that dance used to be an outlet for me, and I would like to get back to that, other than in my kitchen, which I do sometimes. And I do gravitate often towards workouts that have a little bit more choreography to them, because I find them to be fun. But I just need to get back into it. And I've always thought it was a little bit weird for adults to go to like a ballet class. But now that I'm well grown, well past the middle of my life, I think, no, that's not that weird. So
totally.
Yeah, I want to do that more. And my mom is a big opera fan. So I would never go to the opera on my own, ever. And I've gone to the opera quite a bit the last few years. I mean, when I say quite a bit, not during COVID, but pre-COVID, a number of times in a few years time span, because she wanted to go and she didn't have anybody to go with her. And so I loved Alyssa's idea of appreciating art that you don't like, that's not your first choice, as a way to help you love your neighbor. I think this is a real practical thing. My mom wanted to go, wasn't my first choice. So I went because I love her and I want to support her. And I think there could be something in that for our listeners too, that sometimes doing something with somebody because they want to and you love them is a way to love your neighbors.
Well, and I will say that that is love, because opera is not my favorite. So that's love.
Yeah, but it did help me appreciate. I mean, when I could stay awake, I will admit that I often would fall asleep.
Opera's tough for me. It's tough.
There's a lot of emotion there.
Mm-hmm.
And she really resonates with the music and the emotion and the stories. They're all familiar to her. She wants to go to ones that she knows, and the storyline, and she loves it. And I find it to be a little bit melodramatic, but there is something there. And that's what I was walking away with. Like, there's something here that helps me understand her better, but helps me understand all these other people better, that there is this core desire to connect with emotion that is present in the music and present maybe in the lyrics, though they can get kind of repetitive, but in the storyline. And so that touches on all the things we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Krista? What are forms of art that you engage with that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, one that probably people don't think about very much is interior design. And that's something that I engage with a lot as I renovate our own house, but also help others with their spaces. And it really is like a blank canvas for me. When I walk into a space, now often when I walk into a space, there's stuff filling that space. So it's not a blank canvas, it's actually a filled canvas. And I have to, in my mind, wipe that canvas away and then recreate something in that space that's different from the canvas that is showing right at the moment. And so it's, a lot of people don't think of that as an artistic expression, but for me, it's 100% artistic expression. It's figuring out, colors and how colors play together, figuring out pattern and texture, and Even how you arrange things in a space is really critical. Just like on an art, canvas, where you put things is really important to the eye. Well, it's the same way with interior design. Where you put things is actually really important as you are creating this scape in your room or even outside, whatever. So that's one way. And then I would say another way that I engage in artistic expression is through cooking. And I tend to not be a baker because bakers have to be really exact and scientific. It's very, science based, whereas cooking is very creative and free flowing. So I can add a little bit of that, this, a little bit of that. I can play with portions. I can play with fresh herbs and, oh, I think this would be good. And so it feels very artistic to me. Whereas I think in baking, decorating can do that. But in general, I just think cooking tends to lend itself a little more that way, and how flavors play together, and then the nourishment that comes from that. I think is very in the artistic realm, because I think the point of art is to nourish, and I think you're literally, when you're cooking, you're literally nourishing. And I think even how I use fresh ingredients or seasonal, I'm big into using seasonal ingredients, and so that all plays in too.
Right, because if we're thinking of art as a way for the artist to reflect something that's true about the world and about God back to the world, that's what an artist does. Then when you're using those fresh ingredients to make something new, you're not only using God's good things, you're also reflecting his character as a creator. And so I can absolutely see that. Yeah.
Okay, well, is there anything else that you feel like, just around this idea of faith and art, and or even a story that illustrates the importance of artistic expression as we're looking at it and through the lens of faith?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this the last probably 10 years, because I grew up with a father, and I mentioned this on Alyssa's podcast, who was an artist by trade, but I did not have a real strong relationship with him. And in fact, my first book was about that, and it's titled The Artist's Daughter. And so for a lot of my life, I just saw art as something superficial, extra, that got in the way of real life, because I saw my dad's work as getting in the way of my actual life, because he was so distracted by what he was doing. But the interesting thing is, he died while I was writing my first book. And a part of my epiphany, I'll use that word again, as I was going through the creative process of writing a book for the first time and pulling out these things that were deep inside of me to creatively express them on paper, I had this weird connection with my dad. Like, oh my gosh, I now understand how when he was working on something, he would get totally into it and he couldn't see past what he was working on. Again, I didn't have a real strong relationship with him, but I think that's probably what was happening. And I could kind of get that a little more. And so that art, that really impacted me. And so I think I've had a little more appreciation in the last decade than I used to, for the purpose of art, the purpose of art in our own lives, how we're all creators, and finding a balance between having art reflect our lives and maybe having art be our lives. Because when the art becomes a barrier between responsibilities and relationships, then I what it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Like, what where's the monster here? I don't know. And maybe this is a very niche problem for people who are in relationship with artists. But I think for all of us, as we delve into our work, whatever that might be, our creative process, even, I'll take cooking as an example, even making dinner or preparing for a party, if the food becomes more important than the party and the people, then we have to just check ourselves a little bit. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say that that's a little story from my life about why I've thought about it so much. And then when I wrote my next book, I was thinking about it so much that I included a chapter on creativity, because I was watching how women really do let this part of their life go when the busyness takes over. So my second book was Loving My Actual Life. It was a 9-month experiment about refocusing on 9 areas of my life that I thought would help me love my days more. And creativity was one of them. And I say at the beginning of that month's chapter, if there was one chapter I was ready to cut, it was this, because another chapter was meal planning. I have to obviously make dinner for everyone every night, but I can cut out the creative. It's not crying for my attention in the same way. Whereas a hungry child is. And yet, because I know from the very beginning that God is a creator and he made me in his image, there is a creative part in me that has to be utilized in some way. And for some seasons of my life, I'm going to have lots of time to dedicate to it. And in other seasons, I'm going to have less time. But if I completely squelch it, I am squelching part of how I'm created. And so maybe for a season of my life, it is cooking, because I have to do that anyway. And so I can use that as a creative outlet. But it may not be my first choice of creative outlet when I have hours to spend when my kids are all grown and gone. So I think recognizing that we have to have some space in our life where we are expressing ourselves creatively. It might be rearranging our furniture. I remember I asked the women who attended our first mastermind retreat while I was working on this chapter, what are some ways that you use creativity in your life? And I remember Jody McNatt, who's been on the podcast, said, when my kids were little, she has 5 kids. When my kids were little, I used to rearrange the furniture in one of my rooms because it was free. I didn't have to put my kids in the car. And every time I walked into the room, it was like a gift to myself, like, oh my gosh, look how fun this is for that day. And so she said, it just kind of changed things up a little bit. And creativity helps us get unstuck when we find ourselves in patterns and behaviors that become rote, and we start to get a little bored with our days, and then we start to resent our lives. So creativity helps push us to mix things up. So there's my speech
Yeah.
on creativity, my
No,
monologue.
it's great. No, it's great. I was actually thinking as you were talking, especially at the beginning, I mean, it's interesting too, with you not having a super close relationship with your dad. Now you have all of this art. And so, in some ways, you're still engaging with him through his art.
Yes. If
That's
you're
an
watching on
interesting.
YouTube, right behind me
Uh-huh.
is a piece of art that he made. And yeah, we have stuff around our house, and it is a way for me to engage with him that's interesting, for sure.
Yeah, so it's yeah, I was thinking about that when you were talking, that isn't that fascinating that in some ways you're still getting to know him through his artwork.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just an interesting dynamic.
Well, and I know for sure it's part of the reason why going to art museums has been a value of mine with my kids, because I was raised around art and museums and galleries and studios. But because I feel like there is this thread, this family thread that is there, that they never knew him and won't be able to. But maybe if I can put this art appreciation into them, it can be a ripple of legacy. So yeah, there's a lot there that not everybody has, but I think maybe a lot of people might. Like if your mother was a lover of music, like mine is. I mean, my kids have all gone to the opera. We all made them go to one. because I want them to know this is something that their grandmother loves, and maybe when they're 40, they'll go to an opera again and they'll remember this. So I think there is that legacy and faith in music for sure. I mean, our church sings hymns not every Sunday, but they throw one in every once in a while. And I love because it's this legacy of Christian faith that it takes us back to and reminds us that we aren't the first people to have been around this place. And so I think that is an interesting thing that I haven't really thought that much about, but as I'm talking, I find it interesting.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting that you say that, because I was just with someone the other day who we were looking at core values of this organization, and he used the visual of, it was a river and the banks kind of coming down, and he said, it took so many years for this river to, forge this path, and the banks shaped the river too, right? So you've got this like kind of this whole thing of like, um, this took many years for this to happen. And so, there's something about this visual element that sticks with you and makes it different. And what he was saying was, you know, this place, this organization has stood on years and years and years of faithful Christians who have shaped it over time. And that visual was powerful, and we're all walking away with that visual. And so it just, there is something very different. I think that's what I'm taking away from this series, is that when you engage with art, it sticks with you, and there's something that happens differently within you. And so how can I do that more? So in the interview, I believe it was with Alyssa. Yeah, it was with Alyssa, where I talked about how when Gayla Irwin brought those little postcards of art pieces to one of our retreats, and how powerful that was. And, I think we can do that into our spaces. We can say, how can I engage in this activity, bringing an artistic expression in? Now, whether that's music or a story, maybe it's just a story. Maybe it's a story you tell. So you kind of go moth on the group and you actually do storytelling or have other people tell stories. Or maybe you go to live theater together, or, I don't know, whatever it is. But I think it's what I'm walking away with is this question of, how can I infuse an artistic expression into fill in the blank? And maybe there's not always a way, and maybe there's not time, but sometimes the answer will be, oh, here's a way. And that is a way for us to kind of make a more textured life and a more textured faith. Because I think as we get to this idea of how does art encourage faith and help us to, grapple with faith, it does. But it's a matter of, are we bringing it in and allowing it to?
And there is something incarnational about making something. And Alyssa talked about this. If you're making something that somebody can see and touch, that is an expression of the incarnational life. But also, Mitch talked about this, if you're performing in this incarnational way where you're using your body on the stage in whatever form, that there is something spiritual there. And to let that be spiritual, even if the topic and the content isn't, to say this is an expression of the spiritual life because it is an incarnational making. And as a Christian, I can appreciate even just the avenue, even if I don't appreciate the content.
Yeah, it's great. Well, thanks, Alex. This has been, I feel like it's been a challenging series for me in a really good way, and not something that I was expecting. So it's been a surprise, and it's been fun for me.
Yeah. And I would encourage people, if you skipped to this episode and you thought, I don't really want to do summer school, go back and listen, because it's not like the school of 30 years ago when we had to sit through a class. It's what we actually want to talk about and learn about.
Mhm.
So go listen to the experts. They do a beautiful job of engaging us so that we can engage the world to be world changers for good right where we are.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll look forward to the next series.
Okay, bye.
Bye.